We are now on the top of Daf Samach Beis, and we're up to Umi Islay L'Rav Chizda Hoil, which if you count down from the top of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Well, let's just review the last thing that we saw yesterday. Rav Chizda said that an Orel is considered a bar kapara as far as Korban Pesach is concerned, against Rabbah. And his reasoning is that Hoil di boy misake nafshe, that although now he's an Orel, but he could circumcise himself. And as we pointed out yesterday, that's sort of a theoretical possibility, because right now his life would be in danger if he circumcised himself. But according to Rav Chizda, we have a principle called Hoil. Hoil means we look at a theoretical possibility, even if in actuality he's not materializing that theoretical possibility. That's called Hoil. So Hoil is a principle that bridges the gap between potential and actual. And what that means is that the Orel, since he does have a potential, he is not excluded from the kapara of Korban Pesach. And basically, according to Rabbah, if we go back to Rabbah's position, Rabbah says that in order to have what's called a psul of shini bailim, you need dumya hu lechavero, that the person for whom he shechts the korban is someone who could have the kapara. Then and only then do we have a psul of shini bailim. But if he has in mind someone other than the bailim who is completely out of the league, he's not a bar kapara vis-a-vis that korban, then there's no psul of shini bailim. That's Rabbah, and Rabbah applies that to the case of Orel. Orel is outside the purview of the kapara of Korban Pesach. Comes along, Rav Chizda says, no. There is a psul of shini bailim, because the Orel is included in the chiyuv of Korban Pesach. An Orel is not allowed to eat from Korban Pesach, so how can he possibly have the kapara? The answer is there's a theoretical possibility. Don't exclude him from kapara. There's no psul gavra here. Right now he's an Orel. He's got a problem. He is unable at this moment in time, at this crossroads on Yudalit B'Nisan, Nisan, he's incapable of implementing and undergoing a circumcision of Milah. But he certainly could circumcise him. And maybe he'll get lucky and he'll survive the operation. So that's the sheet of Hoil. And the Gemara at this point is going to go back to Perek Elu Ovrin, which is the third Perek of Masechet Pesachim. And there, on Daf Mem Vav, the Gemara records a machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Chizda about the following case. It is Friday Yontif, and he's baking for Shabbos on Yontif. There's no Erev Tavshilin right now. Let's say he has already eaten as much food as he possibly can on Yontif. Now he's baking a loaf of bread. He has in mind Shabbos. He's baking for Shabbos. Rabbah says he's not chayav, even though baking is one of the 39 malachas, and he's certainly out doing it l'tzarech yontiv, so it's not l'tzarech ochel nefesh. But nevertheless, says Rabbah, there's a theoretical possibility that he might want to eat this kikar, or guests will show up unexpectedly and he'll feed them the kikar. That's called hoil. And Rav Chizda says, no, there's no such business as hoil. He ate his sudas yontif. He has no intention of eating another loaf of bread. He can't fit it into his belly. And this loaf that he's baking, he's clearly baking for tomorrow. That's not l'tzarech ochel nefesh. He's going to get malchus. So a ofer miyontif lechol, according to Rav Chisda, will incur chiv malchus, because Rav Chisda rejects the principle of holy. Rabbah puts all the emphasis on the theoretical possibility. Hoil allows me to bridge that gap between what's real and what could be. In reality, I'm not interested in eating this kikar on Yontif. It's not l'tzorech hayom. But theoretically, I could feed it to Archim, who show up, like the 3 Ovrei Derech that showed up at the beginning of Parshas Vayera, and I'll feed them this loaf of bread. That's enough to remove the chiyuv of ha'ofer l'tzorech. Comes along the Gemara now and says, wait a minute, things are all crossed up over here. You can't be a Democrat and a Republican at the same time. Rav Chisda now, in the case of an Orel in vis-a-vis Korban Pesach, is calling him a bar kapara because of Hoel. He could circumcise himself. So Rav Chisda therefore adopts the principle of Hoel. Well, I have news for you. Rav Chisda is on the other side of the equation when it comes to Hoel, because in Ofer Miyontiv L'chol, he rejects Hoel. It's Rabbah who insists on Hoel. We're all messed up now. Umi is Leila Rav Chisda Hoel. The Gemara is asking a rhetorical question. Can you assume that Rav Chisda accepts Hoel? For Itmar, we learned to Ofer Miyontiv L'chol. On Yontif, he bakes, and he has no interest in eating it on Yontif. He's baking for the express purpose of eating it tomorrow on Chol. Rav Chisda Amar Loke. Rav Chisda says it's not l'tzorech ochel nefesh. He's violating Meleches Hafiyah. He gets malchus for that. And Rabba Omar ain't a Loke. And Rabba says there's no malchus. And why not? Rabba Omar ain't a Loke. The Amrina and Hol the Imekloile Orchim. If, as chance would have it, Orchim, unexpected guest showed up, Chazile, that loaf of bread that he's baking today on Yontif is Roy Lachila on Yontif. Is therefore Ashtanami Chazile. Even now that he doesn't have any Orchim, it's enough that he has a pas hara'uya le'echal b'yontif through Orchim. And that's going to bridge the gap, as we said before, between what's real and what could be in potential. And therefore, lo look, he does not get malchus. Rav Chisda Amar Loke. Why? Lo Amrin Hoel. We reject Hoel. Rav Ashi just finished telling us that, as we saw yesterday in great detail, that Rav Chisda's shita is that an orel is considered included in the kapara of the Korban Pesach because of the principle of Hoel. How do you reconcile that with the position of Rav Chisda Ofer Miyot V'chol Loka because he rejects the principle of Hoel? Bishlema de Rabba Adarabba Lo Kasha. I never had a stira. I never intended to raise a collision, a contradiction between Rabba's 2 positions. Number one, his position that an orel is excluded from the Korban Pesach. He's a lav bar kapara vis-a-vis the Korban Pesach, and therefore machshava for an orel is not called shini bailim, because bailim has to be dumya de chavero, and it's not dumya de chavero because the orel is out of the parsha of Korban Pesach. And I'm not going to introduce Hoel, and yet Rabbah is he's the bar hochi, he's the balashit of Hoel in the case of Ofer Miyontif L'chol. That wouldn't bother me. There's a fundamental difference between the 2 cases. In the case of Orchim, on Shabbos, in this case on Yontif, that's not called Mechusar Maisa. The Orchim will show up. You don't have to change the status and make it into L'tzorech Ochel Nefesh. It's litzarach ochel nefesh by the very nature of the fact that it might be litzarach ochel nefesh. That's enough. I don't have to know for sure that it's litzarach ochel nefesh. All I need is the potential and the possibility. But in the case of an Orel, he's got to change himself. He's got to implement a Maisa Mila that will change his status and allow him to partake in the Korban Pesach. Right now, he is an Orel. No matter how you slice the cake, he's an Orel. You can't deny it. And he could do an action to change his status. It's like, what should I say, a Tameh who could jump into a mikveh and make himself tar. An Orel could cut off his Orla and make him into a Ben Bris, a Mohu. But the very fact that he needs a Maisa to do so indicates how radical of a change would occur if he did so. And therefore, BIyun Orel, if he wants to improve his situation and make himself royal, he needs a Maisa Mila, and we're not going to say whole. But in the case of the Orchim, who come atzmam on their own volition, they showed up, is here in this context, Rabbah maintains the position of Hoil. So that's good as far as Rabbah is concerned. Rabbah holds that Hoil works when you're not Mechusar Maisa. It will not operate in the case of Mila, because that's called Mechusar Maisa. But what are you going to do with Rav Chisda? Rav Chisda accepted Hoil, and he included an Orel in a Bar Kapara of Korban Pesach. And why? Because he has the potential of making himself into a Mohul, which means that Rav Chisda accepts the position of Hoil, meaning let's look at the potential. Why doesn't he do so in the case of a Ofer Miyontif L'cho? Amri. So the Gemara offers the following answer. In my translation, whenever you see the word Amri, he translates it as Amru B'nei HaYeshiva. Okay. Ki Lesle Rav Chisda Hoil L'kula L'chumra Isle. In the case of Shini BIyun, when the Kohen HaMakriv had in mind an Orel, Rav Chisda is going to take the position that that is Shini BIyun, and the Orel is Dumya de Chavera, and therefore the korban is possible. That's called Hoil L'chumra. But to say Hoil in the case of Afia Miyontif L'chol, that maybe the Orchel will show up L'kula, and therefore he doesn't violate any Afia because it's L'tzorach Ochel Nefesh, that far we cannot go. Hoil is a very fine svara l'chumra, but not l'kul. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't understand this Gemara. What do I mean? On a technical level, translating the words, understanding the distinction the Gemara is making between the cases of Shochel Pesach L'Shem Orel as opposed to Ofer Miyontiv L'Chol, I can explain it on a very superficial level. But on a deeper level, I don't understand. You've got to take a position. Do you consider bridging the gap between what's real and what's theoretical, what's possible and potential, or you don't want and you refuse to bridge that gap? What difference does it make whether it's l'kul or l'chumra? If in principle you accept Hoil l'chumra to passel the Korban Pesach, then accept Hoil l'kula as well. What are we, allergic to kulos? Adarab, the Gemara says at the beginning of Masechet Beitza, koach tetera odif. It takes even more brilliance to come up with a koach tetera. What is going on in this Gemara? I'm not, on a deeper level, I'm not satisfied with the Gemara. So let me read to you one of the notes over here, and he says the following: Rav Chisda Sover bevadai midoraisa lo amrin klal hoil. This is what I call a cop-out answer. Osis is going to say that when the Gemara is differentiating between Lakul and Chumrah, it's all just a guise. It's all a cover-up for a distinction between Doraisas and the Rabbanans. On a Doraisa level, there is no such thing as holy. And this distinction between L'chumra, L'kula, that doesn't apply on a Doraisa level. The whole business here, says Tosfos, is the Rabbanan. Midrabbanan omrim hoil l'chumra. Again, it's not 100% smooth, but at least icher, as we say in Yiddish, I can hear it. That when the Rabbanan accepted hoil, the Torah never accepted hoil. The Rabbanan accepted hoil as a chumrah. The Torah never accepted hoil.
That's not the way the Rabbanan usually work.
No. Why would the Rabbanan say that we're going to invent something which the Torah doesn't have, namely hoil, invent a whole new mechanism, only for the purpose of a chumrah? Now, look, if you want a gzera here, and you want to talk about classic asus yog Torah, and if we allow this, he might come to this, that I understand, that's the job of the Rabbanan. But to come up with hoil and say that this man who's an orel is a bar kapara because of a new svara d'Rabbanan of hoil, and therefore pasal a korban pesach, what's that all about? Are we having a gzera that maybe if we allow him to shech the korban pesach on behalf of an orel, then tomorrow, next year, he'll shech it on behalf of someone else who's not an orel, and he's not one of the menuyim, he's an eina shinu BIyun? Very difficult to say that because one Kohen fluked it up, so we're afraid that another Kohen will fluke it up even worse. Where is the basis for the Rabbanan to institute a svara of hoil, which the Torah doesn't recognize, simply l'chumra? L'chumra what? To pasal a korban pesach?
But Rebbe, isn't it when you're talking about orachim, you're talking about a situation where the orachim are certainly mutter to eat when the be orachim and to come to on Shabbos. That didn't become some new bria called an orach instead of being being a czar. It's not like that at all. But in the case of an oral has a yontiv. It's us to do a bris milah stam if it's not biyom shmini. So you're telling him we're going to allow him to be counted as one of the menuyim because he may be over on what the halacha is
No. That's not what hoil is. Hoil doesn't mean that right this moment he's going to undergo milah. Hoil means that he's not a gavra who's excluded from the korban pesach. The language of Rav Chisda is that he's a bar kapara. He's obligated in the korban pesach. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. You have a case of, let's say, tefillin. I don't have the ability to put on my tefillin. I'm physically ailing, I have a cast, whatever it is. Are you going to tell me I'm not chayiv in tefillin? I'm obligated in tefillin, but onus rachmona patre. Right now, I can't implement the mitzvah of tefillin, but I'm obligated in tefillin.
Correct.
If, let's say, someone, Rachmana litzlan, doesn't have arms, then he's not chayiv in tefillin. Because you're only chayiv in tefillin al yodecha. You don't have yodayim. But in the case of korban pesach, that's not similar to someone who doesn't have yodayim, who's not included in the obligation. Someone who's an orel is like the case of a person who cannot put on his tefillin because his arms are right now bandaged, he's wearing a cast, or he's very weak and he can't put on the tefillin, there's no one there to help him. So too in the case of an orel. According to Rav Chisda, again, we're not trying to pasel a korban pesach. The oddity here about the Shitas HaTosfos, that the Torah rejected Hoil, but Rav Chisda holds that the Rabbanon created Hoil in order to what? L'chumra, to passel a carbon pesach.
So that would be
Wait, just 1 minute.
go ahead.
The Ein Lahakshos. Okay, this is all part of Tosfos. Imidoraisa Pesach kosher, which means that on a Deraisa level, we don't have Hoil. And even Rav Chisda agrees that he's a Lav Bar Kapara, so there's no psul of Chinim Bailim. Ech Mechayven also, by saying that the carbon is possible, we now obligate him to bring another carbon. We have a principle of Chulin Lazara. You're not allowed to bring Chulin into the Azara. On a Deraisa level, what you have here is Chulin. You were already Yotze Yochiyuv of Carbon Pesach. This is not the kind of mitzvah that you can do twice. You can eat more than a kazayis of carbon pesach. That I understand. But to bring a whole other carbon, when you've already brought your carbon, you already fulfilled your obligation, then it's Nitziv Valozhin oscillates back and forth with regard to matzah and Leil HaPesach. Would the mitzvah be fulfilled on the second kazayis? He ate one kazayis, now he wants to eat a second kazayis. But in a case where he brought a carbon, Pesach is not something that's bob in a dova. There's no such thing as a voluntary carbon Pesach. Either you're obligated or you're not. And on a Doraisa level, since we don't say Hoil, that means that this is not a psul of Shini Bailim, because the RL is excluded completely. He's not Dumya de Chavero. And if there's no psul of Shini Bailim, then the carbon is kosher. Now you're telling him, wait a minute, the Rabbanan were machmir, they invented a svar of Hoil, and hence he's got to bring another carbon pesach. How can you do such a thing? A reza maybe chulin lazara. He says, don't even ask this question. I'd like to ask this. He says, mikeva shechachamim poslu es hashchita shuvein es zorek es adam pilei plun. Tosfos reinterprets reinvents the whole wheel. You know what Rav Chisda means when he says Hoil, and by virtue of Hoil, the carbon is now possible, and again, Tosfos, that's all midrabanan. What Rav Chisda is telling you is that don't be zorek the dam. You shechted the carbon. The Rabbanan are now going to tell you b'shevi al taseh, right? Yesh koch v'yad chacham b'shevi al taseh, like they tell you don't blow a shofar or take a lulav on Shabbos. And now the Rabbanan is saying, don't be zorek the dam. This Rabbanan is very important. If we're getting through Talmud Mishcha, we're trying to get a picture of Kodshim. You would ask me, do the Rabbanan have a right to say that this carbon, which is kosher in the rice, and now becomes possible? Why? Because we're not going to allow you to be zorek the dam. That's something that would never cross my mind. And here we're seeing it right here up front in our sugi, according to Tosfos, that the reason why the carbon is possible, and he's got to bring another carbon to replace this carbon, and that's true for all of Bnei Achabura. The carbon is possible. He had a shini bailim because the machshavas hashochet, the kohen hashochet was for the sake of an aret. Now the Rabbanan are going to say, don't be zorek the dam. If he already was zorek the dam, then he was yotzei the chiyuv of carbon pesach. No one could have obligated him to bring a second one. It's chulin b'azara. The Rabbanan don't have the authority to override chulin b'azara. That's already kumaseh. But what the Rabbanan could do is to exercise their authority b'shevi al taseh. They can instruct the kohen, freeze everything. Let's get ourselves another lamb. Mary had a second lamb. The first lamb will not have a zrika, because we're going to tell the kohen after the shtita, you had the wrong machshava, l'shem arel, and now we're going to apply the principle of hoil midrabanan. Says Rav Chisda, once you apply the principle of hoil, you've got a chinuk bailam over here, and therefore don't be zorek the dam. Sheyesh koch b'yad chachamim lakar dover min haTorah b'shevi altas. Ayin Yevamos Daf Sadi, a very famous sugya. Memela, as a result of the fact that there won't be a zrikas hadam, is nifsal hakarban v'yavi karban acher. So the Achronim say, how far is Tosas going with this svara? Lefi svara zu, ima machshava hoisa b'shashchita al hazrika ha-pesach pasul v'yovi pesach ach. Aval im zorak es adam l'shem orel. Is lo yovi pesach acher. Brilliant. The Achronim derive what is mathematically the next conclusion that we have to derive. At Tosfos makes sense. If he hasn't yet implemented the Zrika, he's only at the level of Shechita, and now he has L'Shem Orel. In such a right that the Shechita should be for the Mulim Almanas Lizrok as Dovo L'Shem Orel, L'Shem Arelim. In such a case, Rav Chizda is going to passel the Karban because we haven't yet implemented the Zrika Saddam. But if he would have a Machsheves Arelim at the time of Zrika, and since on a Doraisa level we don't accept Hoil, which means therefore that the Karban is absolutely kosher, Kishitas Rabbah. But again, even Rav Chizda agrees on a Doraisa level to Shitas Rabbah. There's no psul of Shini Bailim here because it's not Dumya the Chavera. Because on a Derais level we don't have Hoil. And therefore the Orel is not a Bar Kapara. He's completely excluded. Now he was already Zorik the Dav. The covered is kosher. I'm almost tempted, Rabbi, say this is what I'm about to tell you is Apikorsis Gemura. I would be encouraged, I would be in the mood to encourage the Kohen to go ahead and be Zorik the Dam before they catch him. Because I don't want to get a situation in which a carbon that's kosher with the raisa should be possible with Rabbana. And why is it possible with Rabbana? Because Rabbana are going to exercise their authority and they're going to instruct the Kohen not to be Zorik the Dam. Obviously, I'm 100% wrong because we have to listen to the Chachamim, Lo Sosa Mikol Asher Yerucha.
Yeah,
but what it means is that the Kohen is enjoined from being Zorik the Dam. But there's the Achronim. If the Zrika was already implemented, Lefi Zvarazuim Zarkas Adam L'Shem Orel is then Keva de Deraisa, Law reading Hoel, Vazrika, Izrika Kshera on a Deraisa level, is Eno Mevi Karban Acher, Vim Yavi Karban Acher, Harehu Chulin Bazar. Adkan Shitas Atosfos. However, I want to now present to you another shita, which is the shita of Shimshon Mishans, the Rash Mishans. The Rash Mishans says the following: Lefi Ikar Adin Yesh lahachmir midoraisa, and Rav Chizda is talking about a psul deoraisa of Hoil. But again, the Gemara says Rav Chizda is only going to accept Hoil l'chumra,
right,
but not l'kula in the case of ha'ofem miyontif l'chol, Hoil v'ibaya ikli or. There's the following. How can you say such a thing on a Doraisa level that we will accept Hoil and we won't accept Hoil? I mean, after all, that was Gemara's Kasha here on Rav Ashi, that you're involved in a self-contradiction. He says the following. Ayin Kedushin Samaches Amadal. He builds himself on a Gemara in Kedushin, and the Gemara says that im efshar lilmod hekesh mishnei makomos, if you have a possibility of deriving a hekesh from two different sources, imi makom echad havi lechumra, if you derive this hekesh, because again, let's say you have B could be equated to A, or B could be equated to C. It's a toss-up. We don't know which way the winds are blowing. And then Afkamina is that if we equate A with B, well, let me go the other way around. If we equate B with A, it'll be a chumrah. If we choose to equate B with C in a hekesh, because they're all written contiguously, A, B, and C, then it's a kula. So the Gemara establishes in Masechet Kiddushin in such a case, then makshina l'chumra below makshina l'kula. All right. These are rules of Hatorah Nidreshes, man. You don't know which hekesh to go with, so we go with one l'chumra, not l'kula. What does that have to do with Hoya? The Rosh Mishans is very difficult. Either the Torah accepts Hoya or the Torah rejects Hoya. But you can't tell me that, well, let's accept Hoya l'chumra, but we'll reject Hoya l'kula. Well, what kind of business is that? In laws of Hekesh, you want to know what intention did the Torah have when it sandwiched B between A and C. Is it going this way, liel or lara? But what does that have to do with Hoya? Soch the Rosh Mishans, and I'm racking my brains to try to figure this out. Maybe you'll help me. Kimochen BIyun Hoya. B'makom sheyesh svara lahakel, if we accept Hoya. V'yesh svara lehachmir, if we accept Hoya. Anu holchim achrei atzad hamachmir, which means I don't know whether it's to accept Hoya in Yontiv, Ofem Yontiv L'chol. Do we say Hoya? Let's talk about the theoretical possibility that Orchim will show up. It's the Tzorech Ochel Nefesh. Or do we say no? And I don't know whether accept Hoil and apply the mechanics of Hoil in the case of a shchita of a korban Pesach l'shem arel. Should I apply Hoil or not? Becomes a toss-up. And in the framework of the Rosh Mishans, it's exactly the same as Pasuk B, where I don't know whether to equate it with A and go the hekesh this way or go the hekesh that way. And the rule is hekesh l'chumra and not l'kula, in a case where I cannot determine. So too, says the Rosh Mishans, we cannot determine whether the Torah relies on Hoel and implements the mechanics of Hoel or it does not. And in such a case, we're going to apply the same rule as the Gemara in Kedushin of makshina l'chumra v'lo l'kula, and we're going to apply Hoel l'chumra, not l'kula. We don't know. We're up in a toss-up, according to Rosh Mishans. Again, that's not the way we understood the sugya. We understood the sugya that the Iker question fundamentally is, does the Torah accept Hoel, does the Torah not accept Hoel? According to Rosh Mishans, the Torah left it up to us, sort of. The Torah threw the ball in our court and said, do you want to accept Hoel? Or do you not accept Hoel? And the answer is, I don't know. We really cannot come to any conclusion. The Torah was deliberately ambiguous with regard to Hoel, just like the case of Hekesh. That's the Rosh Mishans. And if the Torah is deliberately ambiguous, then just like in the case of an ambiguous Hekesh, we apply the Hekesh l'chumra, not l'kula, so too, in an ambiguous svara like Hoel, I'm going to apply that svara l'chumra. I'm going to passel the korban pesach on a doraisa level, even if he did zrika already. But on a kula level, to apply Hoel and therefore say that he's baking for Yontif when he's really baking for Chol, because Orchim might come through the door, I don't know if I should apply Hoel in that case. So Hoel becomes like a midah shatar nidreshes for him, like Hekesh, and I will not apply that Hekesh if it's ambiguous l'kula. I'll only apply it l'chumra. Hoel is now one of the midos shatar nidreshes for him. It's a svara which I don't know if the Torah operates with the mechanics of that svara and has adopted that svara. The Torah rejects that svara. I'm going to use Hoel and apply whether I like it or not l'chumra, and I'm going to passel the korban pesach. I'm going to force the BIyun, or for that matter, all the b'nei chabura, to replace this korban pesach, because the machshavu is the shem arelim, and Hoel means that he is dumya de chavero he is a bar kapara because he might do the milah, or theoretically he could do the milah, but I'm not going to apply the svara of hoil lakula in the case of a ofer miyantif l'chol. Now, Rabosa, you're the jury over here. You can decide whether you like the Balei Tosis or you like the Rash Mishans. Honestly, I don't like either of them. I'm not happy with the Tosis because I don't see any indication in the Gemara here that we're dealing with the Drabanan. I don't like the Rash Mishans because it doesn't sit well with me to say that the Svar of Hoil, like the case of Hekesh, is a Midah Shatorah Nidreshes Bahen. And I don't know whether the Torah validates this svara. The Torah went out of its way to be ambiguous in order to teach me that, yes, you will rely on this svara and implement it in a case of Hoel L'chumra, but not in a case of Hoel L'kula. Be consistent. Either you accept Hoel or you don't accept Hoel.
Is it?
Truth be told, if I was asked this question, again, nobody asks me anything. But if you would ask me this question, I would have said that the whole question is predicated on a nonsensical premise. Well, what do you mean you're equating Hoel from here to here? The Rav Soloveitchik would throw me out of Shia for such a question. What do you mean you're making equations here? Where there's some universal halach of Hoel? You're talking about whether Gavra is a bar kapara or not, and the answer is that right now he's an Oren, but that's a physical impediment. He can always remove that impediment.
What if he can't?
It doesn't matter whether he can or he can't. He's not a gavra who's excluded from the kapara. The man has a cast on his arm, and he cannot put on the tefillin. You gonna tell me he's not chayiv in tefillin? The man has the obligation to bring a korban pesach no less than you and I do. Shkoyach to our Marlin, from many years ago.
Yeah, but
this guy can't do Mila. Why? Because it's a pikuach nefesh situation. So therefore, he's a labar kapara. Again, you don't have to accept Rav Chisda, but at least you can hear Rav Chisda. Now you're talking about a guy who's ofem miyantif l'chol, and you're telling me, well, maybe the archim will show up. It's Baidim and Politzes. You're equating your apples and oranges. You want to know the status of the Gavra? Is he included in Pesach or is he excluded? I can hear both svaras. But what does that have to do with the fact that maybe the three Arabs are going to show up and knock on your door on the third day of Mila, since we're dealing with Mila, and you're going to run out there to be machnis orchim, and you have a fresh kebab piece of a loaf of bread, and you're going to feed them this loaf, which you admittedly baked for chol. But if the Gemara in the depths of Chazal, of Torah Shebal Peh, they understood what I didn't understand. And there's some sort of universal principle of Hoel as to whether or not we can bridge the gap between what's real and what's potential. And the Gemara thinks that we have to be consistent. Let the Torah then be consistent. Don't tell me you kan l'chumra and kan l'kula. And finally, just 1 second, what time is it? Oh, okay, so wait a minute. Now, I see that we're up to Mincha Gedolah over here. Let's just see. We didn't do Rabbi Elchanan. Oh, so let me just make a quick calculation here. Yeah, I think we'll leave this for tomorrow. And Amir Hashem will finish it tomorrow. So I'm leaving you a little bit in suspense, which is always a good thing. Okay, then have a great day.